Well, if any of you are ever my lucky students, you hear me talk a lot about watercolor being a subtractive medium. And what I mean by that is we don't paint with white paint. All the white, the light in our final paintings comes from the paper itself. So in that sense, any color, any tones we add subtract away from the final amount of white that we have available to us. So what that, no worries. What that leads us to is what is more oftenly referred to as negative painting, which really just means you're painting around areas that you want to leave white. You're leaving areas unpainted to give them power from the pure white of the paper that they wouldn't otherwise have. So what that tells me is, obviously, the power of what you don't paint in a watercolor is just as powerful, sometimes more so, than whatever it is you do paint. Again, this is why the value sketches come in handy, because they allow us to get a lot of this thinking, a little bit of this planning done out of the way before we start painting, because we want to know what areas of the painting to leave light, to leave unpainted. Because once you lose the light in your painting, it's a little dramatic to say you're doomed, but it's just not as easy. So what I'm doing here is just a really quick doodle sketch of a cornice of a building surrounded with other buildings. So there'll be a deep shadow cast across the face of this building from the building on the right. And the building on the left is going to have some material color, which will leave it, even though it's in sunlight, it won't be completely light. This is really a diagram, not an actual painting. So I mean this just to illustrate the ideas of saved light or negative painting. So we can imagine that this building on the right is a brick building. It would have a little bit of warmth, a little bit of red. This building might be pure white. The sun bouncing off that isn't going to have any material color, or very little, except in perhaps the shadowed areas. And the building on the left, in shadow, could have some material color, but it's also in shadow, so it will be darker. Doesn't mean it has to be dull and dark, but it will have a darker, more saturated identity. Across the face of our subject building, it will cast a nice, rich shadow, which I'm going to make out of a combination of complementary warm and cool tones. Largely violets and yellows, golds, purples, and ochres. This is a good example to think also about editing. How much detail do you really need to tell the story of this building? It's obviously in very bright sun. Bright sun can tend to sort of leach out a lot of details in reality. If you walk around and look at the urban landscape, you can easily see that. So every little detail doesn't need to be there. A lot of what works for me in watercolor is that which is implied versus that which is explicitly stated. Meaning you can just hint at a lot of these details without literally having to paint them all. They can just be hinted at, suggested, not deeply rendered. So for the purposes of this quick demo, this is about all I'm going to do. The point I'm trying to get across here, as I said, is the power of what I didn't paint, which is actually the subject of this little sketch, is the face of this building. Has very little paint on it at all. Most of it is saved white paper completely. And then just a hint of a few of these windows peeking out in the bright sun that dissolve into the shadows. So again, it's just one more thing to think about before you start your final painting. Think about where you want your brightest brights to be. And remember that a lot of that area can be left completely unpainted and be just as strong as the areas that are painted. It's that dichotomy that I think works especially well in a watercolor where the white of the paper is literally the light that you have to work with.